Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and we are delighted to have back with us today David Harsanyi. He's a syndicated columnist and author. The first book we talked to him about was Obama's Four Horsemen, and that was an incredible book. Well, he's got a new one out called The People Have Spoken, and They Are Wrong. There's a picture of it there on the screen, and you may want to check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon and take a read. It's fascinating. David, nice to have you back, my friend.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, what provoked you to go down this road?
Politics, I guess. I sort of dismayed at the decisions that we collectively make, and I'm certainly more dismayed when we make national decisions for people locally, because that's not how I think government should be run. And I think that I have a good case that the founders didn't envision that sort of government either. So the larger government gets, the more centralized it becomes, and the less individuals are able to have the communities that they want. They're sort of forced and coerced by national government to do it.
You know, that is fascinating, because we're seeing the struggle between state and federal. And even within the state, we're seeing the struggle between county and state. Even in the state of Oregon, we just had a special session that ended over the weekend, and we came away scratching our heads and saying, well, wait a minute, where's the will of the people here?
Right. I think people believe that when you say will of the people, that it's, the largest majority you can pull together. But I think, for me at least, it's about individual freedom and a way for people to cluster together in communities and have the things that they want. Give you a perfect example. I lived in Colorado for years. There's Boulder, which is extremely liberal, and there's Colorado Springs, which is extremely conservative. People should be able to choose the sorts of communities they live in, rather than having the state or the government federally tell them how they should live their lives. It's pretty simple, and you see it not just in economic terms with Obamacare, for instance. You see it with cultural and societal norms. The gay marriage issue. If government wasn't deciding what marriage looked like and wasn't forcing others to accept the majority's view, then we can just go to our own churches or wherever we want and have the sorts of relationships we think are right. Obviously, that's a very libertarian way to look at it, but
yeah. All right, you say, and why do you say Americans' obsession with democracy is leading to our ruin?
Well, I think that, first off, people treat democracy as if it is tantamount to freedom and liberty, which it's not. It's a process. It's a reflection of either their community or their country or their state, and the majority viewpoints there. The problem is, I think that there are vagaries in democracy. People believe certain things today, they may not believe them tomorrow. I think if we act too quickly, if we have people who scaremonger about certain things, this can be about either terrorism, it can be about economic ruin. We make bad choices that we have to live with for a very long time, and these sort of pile up. So I think that in essence, we have politics too involved in too many aspects of our lives. And so this is really a book about wanting a smaller, more effective government. Because as you see now in Washington, what happens in the end is then you have total gridlock when it's all said and done, when you can't, when you have these huge projects come in and the other, the minority says, stop.
So then how would you describe democracy?
Well, I mean, we need the idea that the majority is, let me just preface this by saying that the idea that the majority is automatically right or should have the ability to coerce the minority into acting as it wants is problematic to me philosophically, just generally speaking.
Right.
But I would say that democracy, when you have a majority coercing the minority, not always, not everything is a coercion, but oftentimes when we pass large laws, you have coercion. So Obamacare forces us to buy a certain kind of insurance that sets up certain sorts of exchanges that we may not want to participate in, and in the end, everyone's a part of it. Now, if you localize that and let states deal with their own healthcare exchanges and their own healthcare policies, you can move to any state you want and have the type of healthcare system you want to live under. We don't even have that sort of ability anymore in this country. So that's the sort of democracy that bothers me. People often say to me, well, isn't the marketplace a democracy? People vote. Well, no, it doesn't coerce me. I don't have to buy a Justin Bieber album or whatever's out there. I have many choices. The way we have setting up democracy now has been eliminating those choices for us.
Well, it certainly seems so. So where did the the term republic fall through the cracks and democracy take over?
Well, in the beginning of the 19th century, there was a bit, I don't know if there's any one moment, but, with progressivism, they are in love with direct democracy, and they're in love with populism, and they're in love with the idea that, the people should have their way. And I don't think the people should have their way. I'm not sure when it exactly happened, but I see it with my kids' textbooks. They talk about democracy as if it equals freedom. But look at Egypt, look at Gaza Strip, look at Russia. You don't always have the best, at least in our view, and considering from our viewpoint, the best sorts of leaders elected. So democracy is simply a reflection of our own ethics and morals. I think that we've had a very good history here with democracy in that sense, but I think that's coming to an end because the divisions in society are too deep to allow that kind of centralized democracy to work.
Because it appears the philosophy of the day, David, is propagating democracy as freedom, when all of it, underneath it all, is really it's a majority rule. Yeah, and I have a big part of the books about how we don't really understand these things. We're passing laws that are very complex about very complicated issues, and there are a bunch of people in this country who don't care enough to know. They still vote. There are a bunch of people in this country who don't have the time to investigate every issue. And there are other people who do know and scare people and try to get everything whipped up. And the president's a perfect example of this. Not really diving into the issues, not really discussing these things, but simply either, calling the others, what he does. So it's populism that's been going on for a long time. It's not just Democrats. But the problem here is that we never actually discuss these issues in a way that's constructive. We just pass laws because we feel good about them, because it's emotion driven. And I think that that's what the founders warned us about when it comes to democracy, and it's what we should be worried about right now. Well, let's go down that road for a moment. What did our founders say about democracy?
Well, clearly they were, there's a famous Federalist Paper 10, which discusses factions and other problems with democracy. But I think that clearly the way they set things up with states' rights, with the 10th Amendment, with the constant ability of parts of our government to stop other parts of our government. Right now we see it. We see Congress sort of creating gridlock in Washington because we had too much democracy, in my opinion, when the Obama administration first took over. The founders were worried about democracy, some more than others. I actually, and not that I'm in any position to argue with the founders, I think they had a little too rosy of a view of humans and how we would preserve our individual freedoms. I think the temptation to gather into large groups and undermine the minorities' ability to rule themselves is just human nature often. But they were clearly worried about it, and democracy isn't even mentioned once in the Constitution. The word democracy is not even mentioned.
So, what's the implication?
The implication is that they wanted a republic, not a democracy. I think they were worried about I'm not a historian, but they seem very much to be worried that one state or two states in particular, Massachusetts and Virginia, would dominate politics. And then later on, through that tradition, we have filibusters, we have the Electoral College, we have other ways to diffuse democracy. We used to have the state legislators decide who goes to the Senate. Now we have direct votes, so we've undermined that diffusion of democracy even more. When you bring stuff like this up, people think you're crazy, but I actually don't trust my neighbors to make decisions for me, and I certainly don't trust Oregon to make decisions for Florida or vice versa.
Right.
So I think it's a pretty good system.
All right, so where does class warfare play into this? Because it seems like the current form of democracy that's being pushed fuels class warfare.
Yeah, and that we've sort of that's been going on for a while in certain stages in our history, especially again in the early 1900s. But we've typically not fallen for it overall. But now it seems to me that we do fall for it, and it's the easiest sort of attack you can make on other people because it attacks them. It's jealousy mostly, but it's an easy person to blame for all of our problems, the rich man. I'm not saying that all people are innocent in this, or bankers are all innocent, but I do think it's a simplistic way to look at the world. And it's very easy to have the majority, which has less, decide that they are going to take from the minority that has more. And what happens then is you have a corrosion of your institutions, as I think we're going through now, because we're blaming everything, or at least many in this country are blaming everything on the richest 1% and so forth, when clearly that's not the problem. And what happens is we fall for all kinds of silly economic ideas, like, in my opinion, the minimum wage and other things, sort of populistic notions about how the economy works. Quite often we want to shut down, we become more isolationist, we worry that people are stealing our jobs, things like that, and we have a sort of inflamed discussion that's not very rational about economics, for sure.
All right, let me take a break here, David, and we'll come back. I want you to you mentioned it earlier when we talked about gridlock. At times, gridlock can be a wonderful thing. I mean, it stops nonsense from becoming law. But beyond that, we have an administration that doesn't care about gridlock. And I want you to comment on that. We're talking to David Harsanyi. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, we're back with David Harsanyi, and we had him on earlier about his book. Was very powerful. Obama's Four Horsemen. I don't know if you haven't picked up a copy of this, you may want to grab it and read it. Comes with a great review from Glenn Beck and others. His latest book is The People Have Spoken, and They Are Wrong. It deals with the term democracy. And I think you'll find this to be a very fascinating read, because it does put into perspective how democracy seems to be the word, and the real word that should be spoken is republic, and how the two maybe have gotten separated. We are going into the break, David. We talked about, and you mentioned earlier, this could produce gridlock. And I can see where gridlock at times can be really a good thing, because it stops nonsense from becoming law. But now, in spite of gridlock, we have an administration that's going to govern through executive order. How dangerous is this?
Well, it's very dangerous. I agree. I think gridlock is actually organic in a way. You have government goes too far to the left, and then conservatives, there's a backlash. Conservatives rise in the House, and they sort of shut it down. So I actually think gridlock is very healthy for typically. Problem is when gridlock starts undermining some of the things that we would just naturally do in government to help run the country. So I think that it's bled into places it shouldn't. But generally, yeah, I think gridlock is excellent. I'm one of the few people in this country who think this Congress has done a very good job, because a do-nothing Congress can be an excellent thing. So I agree with that. Yeah, Obama has threatened to use executive orders to govern. But the funny thing about this, or not so funny actually, is that his excuse is democracy. His excuse is, most people want me to do this, so I will do it any way I can. It's a sort of excuse that authoritarians use all over the place. Most people want this, but the process does not allow me to get it done. So there was a speech he gave after the Newton tragedy about guns, where he said 90% of Americans want this, so I'm just going to use an executive order rather than wait for Congress. So in essence, though, he's doing something that's sort of authoritarian. He's using populism as his excuse to do it. And just because 90% of people want something doesn't make it right, A, and B, we have a constitution exactly to protect us from that sort of, rush to change our inherent rights.
Yeah, the only thing I could say about that, there's an additional fallacy here. It seems that they're quoting figures that are just not true. They'll say, they'll quote a figure, and quite frankly, and you know this, David, you watch it, that's just not true.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, these polls, first of all, they're not true. generally, but even when we look at polls, I don't know how closely they reflect what people actually are always thinking. But even if they did, my argument is, even if 90% of the people want to get rid of the Second Amendment, there's a process, or change the Constitution anywhere. There's a process where you can do that. We have these rights in the Constitution for a reason, and one of them is to protect us from democracy.
Is there any other example out there of democracy run amok that we can learn from?
Meaning in the world?
Yeah, other countries.
Well,
or so-called democracy, I guess.
Well, as I said, it's just a reflection of what we're thinking. So when Israel offered Gaza, autonomy, the first thing they did was elect Hamas, because that reflects what probably most people are thinking there. And when you look at Egypt, when you gave them democracy there, the Muslim Brotherhood took power, and then they were thrown out in an undemocratic fashion. Sometimes you have to wonder, what's more important, democracy or freedom? They're not the same thing. Would you rather have an enlightened nation with a strong constitution that doesn't have an active government, or would you rather just have democracy and see what comes of it? I think the French Revolution and the American Revolution showed what can happen with those two, in their extreme forms, at least.
What happens to morality when democracy runs amok? It appears we are passing laws that are demoralizing morality, so to speak.
Well, and that can happen because, liberals today, they like to pretend that the right wants a theocracy or something. But in truth, almost everything they do is imbued with some sort of moral purpose. So we have to help this one and help that one. And obviously we want to help the poor. We just have different ways of looking at it and different ideas about how that should be accomplished. So I think that now you see religious freedom issues, especially with contraception and other things like that, and Obamacare. That's going to be more and more of an issue because the majority, if they turn more secular, are going to try to force their ideas about the world on the religious minority. And then, of course, you have gay marriage, and and other societal norms. I just don't think government should be telling me what a marriage is either way. That gets very difficult, I understand. But the problem with democracy is that you can force others not only to accept that something exists, but have to, I wrote a piece called Coexist or Else, because you now have to accept their view of the world, the left, so because they have the majority. They wouldn't like it the other way around, and I wouldn't like it either way. So democracy is dangerous in that sense as well. So do you see a pushback coming, David? Because it seems like we're in the nonsense category now. I think there'll be a pushback. I mean, there has been a conservative pushback against this sort of thing. People are less, people want, the 10th Amendment to be upheld. They want states' rights. The problem is with democracy and populism is it seems like the courts follow the majority all the time rather than the Constitution, to me at least. It also seems like there just simply aren't enough states to stop what's been going on very effectively. But as I say, I don't know what the future brings. I have to say I'm pretty pessimistic about this issue. I think that when I see my own kids and the textbooks they bring home, the way they talk about democracy and the way they teach American history, there are a lot of fallacies out there that kids grow up with and believe, and then we're sort of stuck with them. They're embedded in our national consciousness, and hard to fix after that, especially because people don't pay that close attention. A lot of people do care about politics, but tons of people do not, and that's dangerous as well.
Well, it's just we seem to be frustrated beyond measure. Now, you watched probably CPAC over the last week or so with all the speeches I did. We just came through a long-time Republican convention up here called Dorchester, and they elected to endorse same-sex marriages, which now has probably split the party right down the middle. I've never seen such confusion. I mean, I don't know. People don't know where to turn. My biggest concern is they'll become fatalistic and not turn out the vote when really the power is in the vote.
Well, yes, you're right, and that's unfortunate because I mean, I argue that I wish that the power wasn't so much in the vote. I wish that there wasn't so much power in the vote, because it essentially can change entire communities, and it can change the way we look at institutions like marriage, in a way. So I don't know what to say about that. I think that you have a more secular right side of the equation on the Republican Party that feel a certain way about marriage, and then you have more socially conservative folks, and that's really going to split the party, when it shouldn't be about democracy or a vote at all. It should be about whatever your community believes marriage is and what church you go to. But I have a long fight there, because I don't think social conservatives want to remove marriage from government either, frankly. So yeah. So I don't know what to say. I mean, I think there are three parties in this country: Democrats, and you have two parties on the right, the conservatives and the sort of establishment, and it's going to be really difficult for the Republicans to pull it together.
All right, but given midterms elections, they do have a tendency to go back against the majority at that point. It happened in 2010, 2012, Obama gets reelected. Now we're 2014. It could be a significant pushback, and it could even cost John Boehner his job.
Yeah, it could. And I think when you have House elections, it's a more the more local an election is, the more it's about issues, in my opinion, rather than sort of the presidential election, which is just very, populistic and partisan. So I think that actually the House represents America in some ways better than the presidency does, certainly. And if they win back the Senate, I think we'll just have even more gridlock, which, as I said, I think right now is fine until we come to some sort of consensus on which way the country needs to move. Yeah. And I think there has been pushback in this country. There always is. The problem is that when you pass something like Obamacare, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever it is, Social Security, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. So even if you have a better idea, because of the scaremongering. So yeah. When liberals pass something, it's there forever. And conservatives have a harder time dismantling things. So,
well, it's a fascinating read. In one or two sentences, what do you want people to get from your book? The people have spoken, and they are wrong.
Well, I want them to educate themselves about what they're voting on, and I also want them to care more about federalism and states' rights and things that diffuse national democracy instead of strengthen it.
Okay. All right. The book is entitled "The People Have Spoken, They Are Wrong." David Harsanyi is the author, and you may want to check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon, and get a copy of it and read it. Thanks, David. Keep up the good work, my friend.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
All right. Hey, welcome back, and delighted to have back in the studio with us John Mittendorf. I call him our staff researcher. He calls himself John Mittendorf. Yeah. He does work with Answers in Genesis and does a lot of interesting research for us, stuff for us to talk about. We came through the 4 blood moons, which was fascinating.
And we're still alive.
And we're still here.
Yeah.
We got April 15th. We'll see what happens on that one.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, the whole subject of global warming versus climate change has been a very hot topic. And the problem is, it's kind of like democracy and federalism and republic. They all get mixed up, and you think you're talking freedom. You're not. We just came through that discussion. So what's the difference between global warming and climate change? It's significant. In the past, John, I've had our good buddy Leon Hunsaker talk about this from his perspective as a meteorologist. You know.
And he has good background information on the subject.
He went back and looked at, and I'm just going to capsulate. I don't want to give all, I can't directly speak for him, but here's what I got out of it, and that is, it's cyclic. And you look at El Nino and La Nina, and you look at the jet streams, and you look at weather patterns of decades gone past, and he'll say it's a matter of time you cycle through this. Now, that's not to say that there isn't some changes going on, but for the most part, he'll look at it as somewhat cyclic.
How long ago do you think that was that you asked him? Because I can still remember I was listening to the program that day when you asked him.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I can still remember his answer. It's cyclic.
It's cyclic.
Yeah.
So anyway, John has decided to help us get a handle on the subject of global warming and climate change, because I think a couple things come out of this as believers and just human beings on Earth. Stewardship, conservation, and perspective. Remember those three words: stewardship, conservation, and perspective. So let's dive into this. Would you?
Boy.
Are you still okay?
You know, as I was studying for this, Perry, and I've studied a little bit on the subject before, but as I was going through it, and I was impressed with two things. First of all, the complete amount and depth of material that is out there on the subject and how slanted it is. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, as I was studying for this, I thought, you know, there's one other subject that exactly parallels this: evolution, creation, debate.
Oh, okay.
They're exactly the same.
Okay.
On one side, you have the media, you have scientists, most secular scientists. Mm-hmm. You have all these people with credentials that they give them a platform, mm-hmm. that are saying one thing.
That are tenured.
Yeah, tenured. Okay, mm-hmm. Then on the other side, then you have a much smaller category of people that are saying, no, wait, that's not correct. Here are the facts. But the smaller section of people really aren't heard. It's the larger section of people that have the voice of the media and magazines and television and you know, everything else. And you keep hearing this drumbeat over and over and over: global warming, climate change, global warming, climate change, we're going down the tank, the oceans are going to rise 50 feet. And a lot of that, I think, was brought to the surface in 2006 with Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the movie, it showed this polar bear on this ice floe, and the ice floe was slowly melting, and then all of a sudden, the poor polar bear slides off, and you know, now they're an endangered species. And in fact, polar bears are doing quite nicely. Mm-hmm. But I read letters to the editor in Mail Tribune quite often. And it's amazing, the past 2 weeks, there has probably been a letter to the editor in the MT almost every day on global warming. It's amazing.
Okay, and I could tell you this as being a chairman of a politically involved party, that those can be arranged. So if there's an organization out there trying to make a point,
right,
they have their people write those letters.
Exactly. But you know, to the credit of the Mail Tribune, they will print letters from both sides.
Yeah. No, that's their job.
Yeah. And you know, and I think they do a very, very good job of that. As an example, Perry, this was just a couple of weeks ago. Man-made global warming is worsening and will disrupt both the natural world and human society. And I know you've heard this over and over and over again. Warns a joint report of two of the world's leading scientific organizations, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society. Of course, that's United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And this was just a couple days ago, letters to the editor. And I'm just going to quote just a part of it. The facts are that climate disruption is known to be responsible for the superstorms, droughts, and wildfires that communities are experiencing today, and fossil fuel conglomerates are turning a deaf ear to societal problems caused by carbon pollution, and it just goes on and on and on. The point is that you see this over and over and over and over again, and if you take the time to really go in and start to investigate this, you go, wait a minute. This isn't quite as clear-cut as the media makes it out to be. Mm. So I thought that's the tack that we would take, and I want to get away from the media hysteria and everything else that goes along with this, and just look at some basic facts. In fact, I came across a very interesting piece of legislation. It's called the Oregon Petition Initiative. Are you familiar with that? That over 36,000 scientists have signed a petition to the U.S. government talking about global warming. And I'm not going to say exactly what the petition is. I'm going to wait and save that.
Okay.
Wait and save that. So I thought, why don't we start off this morning and look at two major definitions: global warming and climate change, because you see both words used interchangeably, synonymously. But are they the same?
Okay.
And the answer is yes and no. Yes and no. Global warming, and some of this I want to look at because I want to get this exactly right. Global warming refers to a clear and continuing rise in the average temperature of the Earth's climate system. Okay, I can buy that.
Okay.
Okay. And by the way, these definitions are from Wikipedia.
Okay.
Climate change, a significant and lasting change in the statistical distribution of weather patterns over long periods of time, regardless of the cause. Fluctuations over periods shorter than a few decades, such as El Niño, do not represent climate change within this definition. Now, there's a major difference between those two definitions, but can they be used synonymously with each other? And I think to a large degree,
they are.
The answer is yes, from the perspective of that if global warming is really taking place, and we'll get to that in just a minute, if that is taking place, can that impact climate change or affect it? And the answer is yes. So from that perspective, can those terms be used synonymously? Yes. But are they different? Yes, they are. And I think during our discussion, I want to use global warming as an umbrella for the complete discussion, because most of the time when you see articles written on this, when you see the media hype on this, it'll be global warming, global warming, global warming.
Which means the continuing rise of the average temperature of the Earth's
climate system.
Yeah,
exactly right.
Okay.
Or in other words, I think from a more simplistic viewpoint would be the average temperature or the rise of the temperature of the Earth.
Yeah.
So,
now, I have also heard and read that even though those who are concerned about global warming are backing away from the term global warming,
right,
and going to climate change because the cycle says, yeah, you'll go through a warm period, then you go through a cooling period.
Well, there's another reason for that. If you think back a couple of years ago, remember when the news media announced that they had found emails from the global warming community that really they had jimmied the information and a lot of the information was not correct, that they were slanting it towards their perspective? Remember that? There was a little firestorm over that. So all of a sudden, global warming was dropped and then a more friendly terminology was used. Climate change.
Okay.
See, so I think, yeah, it's a combination of both. That climate change is kind of a more friendly approach towards global warming. It's not as, it doesn't rub you quite as much as global warming does. You know, well, I can hook into climate change, yeah, and particularly with all the cold they've had back in the east, you know, the past 3 or 4 months, you know, see, I told you so, it's a climate change. You know, it's interesting, whether we have droughts, whether we have heat, and of course then you have the all the freezing temperatures and the record snow levels back in the east, well, that's the cause of, or that's the result from climate change, global warming. And I think the people in the East right now have a hard time hooking that one up. So.
Okay. So okay, well, I don't want to get too political here, but it appears that the argument is changing from global warming to climate change because that's more universal in their argument.
I think from my perspective also, it's also a friendlier approach to it.
Right.
But it's really, when you read the literature, it's basically global warming, global warming, global warming. So when you say both terms, I think we can put them in the same camp, although they are really different.
Okay.
They are different, yeah. So in talking about this, Perry, I wanted to start out this morning and start off first with the biblical perspective.
Good.
Okay.
Good place to start.
Yep, and the question is, who owns this world and is responsible for wise stewardship? And I think
God owns it, and we're supposed to be good stewards of it.
Boy, you've got that right. And you know, it starts right off Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens, the earth. I mean, it's obvious. Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. So, it's in reality everything that we see, the universe, the earth, it's God's, but we have no right to exploit it. And I think that's very clear in Scripture. But here's something that's also interesting, Perry. In Genesis 1:28 says, God directed Adam and Eve to be fruitful, and I'm quoting, fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And I'm going to come back to that word in just a minute. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and every living thing that moves on the earth. And then, of course, Genesis 2:15 then goes on to say, then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. So as a result, we have a direct responsibility from God to care for what we have been entrusted with, even though this universe and this earth have been cursed by sin and are doing what?
Decaying.
Decaying, coming apart. That's exactly right. So things, even if you go back thousands and thousands of years, things are not getting better. You know, second law of thermodynamics, everything is running down. So we have been entrusted, according to Genesis, by God to, and the word that I want to come back to is subdue the earth, and in Hebrew that word is translated into use it for your benefit, is almost an exact Hebrew translation on that word. But I think within that definition, Perry, there is still a major concept of using it wisely, using what God has entrusted to it, even though it is running downhill. So I just wanted to start off with that and talk about that we do have a responsibility according to Genesis, the first chapter of Genesis. Now, let's continue on and talk about 6 primary claims about global warming. And what I want to do is just go through, and we might have to continue this on the 24th.
All right, let me take a good break here. This is a good place to take a break, and we'll come back. We'll deal with the 6 primary claims about global warming. I think it's very important that you get what he just said about the biblical perspective of it. We are living in a cursed world that is slowly declining. We are to subdue it. We are to be good managers and stewards of it. Have we exploited it? Can we correct some of those things?
Right.
You know, what's the difference between conservation and environmentalism? That might be another argument.
Ooh, there's another good one.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back.
Hi, I'm Paula and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
All right, we're back, and we're talking on a new series. We won't get through it today. It's going to take a couple of times. Global warming versus climate change.
Right.
John Mittendorf's home phone number and cell number is
541.
No. We're just trying to get a
handle on it.
A handle on this discussion. Is huge, and I have to tell you, there's a couple of issues out there that are hot buttons. This is one of them. Environmentalism versus conservation is another. Same-sex marriage is one, abortion is one. Yeah. And it's amazing how we quickly camp out on one side, which may be okay, but do we really know what we're defending?
Right.
Or are we just in a popular camp?
Do you know the facts?
Do you know the facts?
Right.
And this is our attempt here today is to give you some good background on global warming, climate change from a biblical perspective. All right, now.
And by the way, Perry, we'll be back on the 24th with this and finish this up. But at that time, then I'll have all the notes completed, and we'll make the notes available that has all this information, links they can go to and check it out. You'll
be able to get them at the website or come by here and get them.
Exactly.
All right, 6 primary claims about global warming.
Okay, first of all, global warming is really taking place, is what they're saying. Is that true or false?
Okay. My limited knowledge.
It's 50-50. It's either yes or no.
Well, I'm going to say in my limited knowledge, the answer is yes.
You're exactly right. Global warming is taking place. And, from a scientific perspective, the National Climatic Data Center, how's that for a list of words?
Shows the Earth temperature going up.
Shows the Earth temperature since 1880 has gone up 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. So it is taking place.
Since
However,
1880.
Since 1880.
So it's 130, 40 years.
Yeah. But I want you to keep that in mind, because when we come back the 24th and talk about this, that 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit is going to become very, very important. Okay? Second question. Greenhouse gases are responsible for life on this earth.
Not
true or false?
Not true.
How would you answer that then?
What do you mean?
Well, greenhouse gases are responsible for life on this earth, and that's basically what the environmentalists are saying. Is that true or false?
I'm sorry, I misread that. I think you're saying greenhouse gases are responsible for the temperature rise.
Let me put it this way. Greenhouse gases are responsible for maintaining life on this earth.
Well, I can't answer that because I don't know the true definition of greenhouse gases.
Good, because I'm going to give it to you.
Okay. I can't answer that one.
Yeah, the answer to that question, Perry, is basically yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of factors for life on this Earth. Yeah.
CO2, oxygen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, when you look at the Earth's environment, you have at the upper troposphere, you have 4 major gases. You have water vapor, you have carbon dioxide, you have methane, and you have ozone.
Okay.
What's interesting is, and this is what's not talked about in the media, is that water vapor provides the majority of the greenhouse gases, probably 95%. Carbon dioxide, the gas that's most debated, and you've heard that term over and over and over, CO2, CO2. Burning of fossil fuels are putting more CO2 in the atmosphere. It's going up, and it's blocking the greenhouse, it's blocking the rays, and it just goes on and on and on and on. Carbon dioxide really provides a very, very small percentage of the greenhouse gas, only about 5% or a little less than 5%. And of course, methane and ozone is a very, very small percentage. It's water vapor that does the most of it. And the way that it works, Perry, is if the greenhouse gases are in balance the way they're supposed to be, you have the ultraviolet rays from the sun, comes through our atmosphere and hits the Earth. And then, of course, then in a lot of cases, they can be redirected back outside the Earth and then back towards the sun. As the greenhouse gases change, they can either let less ultraviolet rays through to the Earth, or they can let more heat from the Earth back into space. So you can see that if the greenhouse gases are not in balance, if the greenhouse gases don't let enough rays from the sun come through, the Earth is going to be cooler. And then, of course, if the greenhouse gases are still not in the right percentage, and they let too much of the heat go back out, it can be the opposite, so to speak. So, depending on the greenhouse gases, you get too much. Wait, let me back up a second. You have too much rays from the sun coming through, the Earth is going to be too warm. And if the rays are then directed back out into space, then the Earth is going to be too cool. And that's just a quick overview of how that works. So, if the greenhouse gases are not in balance, can it change the temperature of the Earth? And the answer is yes, it can.
Yes, it
Can that affect life on this Earth? Yes, it can, in a very big way. However, what's not really being printed or published or talked about is the fact that carbon dioxide is really a very, very small part of that. It's water vapor that does the majority of it.
And there's a reason we have large oceans.
Yeah, 75
of the Earth?
Yeah, 2/3 of the Earth,
It's
close to
water.
70% is water. Which, by the way, Perry, is the major receptacle for carbon dioxide. As the sun's rays come through the greenhouse effect through our atmosphere and hits the ocean, the warmer the rays are, the warmer the water is going to be, more evaporation is going to happen. More evaporation, more CO2 is going to go into the atmosphere. The cooler it is, the less evaporation, the less CO2 you're going to have.
Okay. Fascinating.
Okay.
Interesting.
Pretty simple, right?
Yeah. Well,
and it is pretty simple.
Yeah.
It is pretty simple. Global warming will drive many plants and animals to extinction. And I know you've heard all of these over and over and over. True or false?
No.
And that is false. It's a fact that changing conditions such as volcanoes, wildfires, melting ice caps, and receding glaciers are capable of, affecting a diversity of people and plants. But you know what's interesting is that we have a governmental endangered list in place today for animals that are being endangered. Not because of global warming, but primarily because of poaching, deforestation, and a host of other reasons. It really has nothing to do with, that portion has nothing to do with global warming. And so currently there is a lack of evidence to support extinctions, I knew I could get that right, resulting from global warming. It's all part of the hyperbole. All I have to do is just write an article and say, mankind is headed for death due to a changing Earth. Plants and animals are going to extinction. The world is getting warmer. The glaciers are receding. The polar bears are sliding off the ice caps, and the polar ice caps are receding, and which, by the way, they are. And by the way, they are. But if you go back to after the Ice Age, there was a lot of glaciers. So as Leon said, it's cyclical to a large degree. And we're going to get into that a little bit more the 24th when we come back and talk about this.
And I may add, from a political standpoint, by moving off of global warming to climate change, if the Earth does cool, they're still within their argument.
Yes.
And so therefore they can capitalize off of it.
Yes,
okay.
yes, yeah.
All right.
Next one. The oceans will dramatically rise during the next century. Where have you heard that one?
All over the, well, Big Al.
Big Al.
Big Al says that.
Yeah, an inconvenient truth. He implied the oceans will rise 20 feet and submerge much of the Earth's coastlines in the next 50 years. And of course, that is his opinion. Mm-hmm. And he's not a scientist. And so in doing some checking, I came across a current climate model from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they estimate, and by the way, they're not too bad, they estimate that ocean levels may rise approximately 16 inches in this century. May. Which is a far cry from the Armageddon that the other side is talking about. Far cry. So, can the ocean levels rise? Yeah, they can rise a little bit. So it's not that big a deal. 50 feet, you know, that's something else. By the way, did you know that after the flood, that the ocean, they figured the ocean levels rose somewhere between 200 to 300 feet.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's because of...
Permanently?
Yes, because there used to be a landmass between Alaska and basically Siberia, which is now covered up with water.
Okay.
See? So, and that's, I think that's scientifically acceptable.
Okay.
All righty?
Even though they don't believe in the flood.
Even though they don't believe in the flood, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Next, weather catastrophes will increase due to global warming. Have you heard that one before?
Oh, well, that's the whole reason of what's happening in the East Coast.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's interesting that weather patterns were relatively stable prior to Noah's global flood, but have significantly fluctuated since the flood. And so basically, when God created this earth, everything was perfect and everything was stable. And then, of course, Adam and Eve sinned. And what I'm talking about now, science rejects. Science rejects. But when Adam and Eve sinned, the universe and the earth was cursed. And since then, second law of thermodynamics, everything is running down. And so since then, since the flood particularly, you have had changing climate conditions that were not there prior to the flood. Prior to the flood. So, do we see major changes and swings and cyclic proportions in weather changes today? Yeah. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Okay. And that's since the flood. It's also interesting that since the advent of satellites and other advanced equipments, weather events have been able to be recorded in accurate detail, and that's since about 1978. They've been keeping a pretty good track on that. And basically what that means is that since 1978, they have been keeping a closer track on weather patterns, but prior to 1978, they really weren't. So what that means is that there has not been a justification in being able to validate an increase in weather catastrophes over a long period of time. So in other words, they've just been tracking it, I would say, from a very specific viewpoint more recently than over a long, long period of time. So although we do know that there was an ice age, a little ice age, there was the warm period, roughly what they call the warm period, which is AD 900 to 1300. We know that. I'll get to that a little bit later.
All right, we probably won't get to the last couple, but we'll deal with it next week. Let me ask you this. How do you explain the increase in, say, hurricanes, volcano reactions or eruptions, or typhoons and tsunamis and stuff like that?
Well, interesting question, Perry, because even though the number of hurricanes has increased in recent years, and I found this in the Journal of Nature Geoscience, they've concluded that global warming is not the cause for increased hurricanes, and they will likely decrease by the end of this century. So again, it's cyclic. We've had an increase in hurricanes, correct? But Nature Geoscience Journal says that by the end of this century, they feel that it's going to cycle back to less hurricanes.
Interesting. All right, we're out of time, but we're going to continue with this, the difference between global warming and climate change, the differences and the similarities.
On the 24th, we're going to cover, are humans causing global warming?
Are humans?
That's the big question.
Okay, because I've often wondered why those who propagate this aren't going after third world countries that are clearly violating. We're doing pretty well here in the country
compared to China and some other countries.
Beijing and others,
Russia. Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks, John. All right, stick around, and when we're all done in a week or so, we'll make these notes available to you. Thanks, John.
You bet.
We'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.